All right, welcome everybody. It's good to know you're out there, even though I can't see you, but I see there's 148 little people on the bottom, so that's good. It's a little weird to present to nobody, and I can't see anybody. Yeah, I'm going to talk about our examiner's role. We need to work on examiners a little bit, and remember that when we are giving that road test to students, or when we're giving them that written permit test, that we are strictly a driver license division endorsed examiner. We are no longer an instructor, so we shouldn't be giving them any helpful hints or anything. And then once we get those students in there and ready to put into DEMS, there's a couple of little tricks that I want to show you. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. I'm working with the wrong mouse here. And okay, so here is, sorry, 1 second. I want to make sure I can still see the chat. There we go. Here's our presentation. We're going to work on the examiner's training and the driver education management system, which is called DEMS. DEMS is something that the driver license division doesn't actually use in their day-to-day business. And so sometimes it can be problematic. They use a different system that we use DEMS to go and connect into to pull the student out so we can enter information. And then the driver license division, their software goes to DEMS and pulls out the completion. And if we don't have it in there exactly right, we can cause trouble on both ends of that. So we're going to go through some of that. How many of you have heard of Interraider Reliability? Use your chat feature and go ahead and type in, or you can use the Q&A. Okay, consistency among those doing rating. Yep, that's right. Thanks, Dean. Hey, Dean, where did you learn about Interraider reliability? A conference. Nice, nice. Anybody else ever heard of it? Timothy says he learned about it through ETS. Yeah, the Educational Testing Service talks about Interraider reliability. AP testing, Audra says. Yeah, cool. So a lot of teachers who don't use AP or who don't teach AP have never heard the phrase Interraider reliability. What it means is that we want to talk about, and well, we don't want to talk about, we want to make sure that from one tester to another, that the scores those two testers would give to the same student would be the same in theory, or very, very, very close. As we apply it to driver education, we're going to talk about why it's important. And that is that we want that consistency that Dean brought up. Okay, with, if we're all trained the same way to give our tests and we're all using the same rubric, in theory, a student should be able to take a test with me at Lone Peak and get a score. And that same student would get a score from a teacher from Box Elder or Beaver or Uinta, and the score would be the same. We've got that rubric on the testing sheet that the driver license division gives us. And the only thing that really can cause a huge difference between a test that a score that I assign to a student and a score somebody else might assign to a student could be either misunderstanding how to administer the exam, or possibly a bias that we have toward or against the student, or if there's a problem with either one of those two things, or if there's a problem with that instructor for another reason or that student for another reason. So one of the ways we can reduce having this variability occur amongst testers or examiners is to make sure we're all following some testing ethics and testing behaviors. I'm going to go through that very quickly. Our ethics, as we have been told recently, is that whenever possible, instructors should not drive their own students. Now that's probably new to some of you. I think that it's been out there for a while, but I also think it's a slightly new interpretation of an existing law. It's written in Utah code that you should not test your own students. Mr. Lortster, sorry, you're asking about driving or testing. It's the driving examiner's test, the road test. So you can test students on the permit test who are your own students, because it's a very cut and dry, the answer is A or it's B kind of a test. A computer can score it kind of a test. But the road test is a little bit harder, and it's much easier for us to let bias or maltraining to come into play. So whenever possible, you should not test the students that you train behind the wheel. You can test other students who are at your school. You can test students that you taught in the classroom. But if you're the one that has done their behind the wheel 6 hours of training and observation, we want to not test those same students with that same driver whenever possible. Now, I understand it may not always be possible to do that, but that's the goal. If you are not able to have someone else help you test students because maybe you're the only instructor at your whole school, and maybe the next closest instructor is 40 miles away, talk to Audra, email her, and she can help you come up with a step-by-step plan for how to avoid any kind of ethics issues. The other thing that you want to talk about is to not let students take more than 2 attempts on any test, whether that's the written test or the road test. Now, this is a new thing, and it's more of a policy thing than it is a law. Utah State Board of Education will reimburse us up to twice for students who take the road test and do their road training with us. Audra can explain that if you're interested in how that functions. It's more of a problem for district coordinators than it is for the classroom teacher. But we've really only ever been able to give up to 2 road tests to a student. After that, we ask them to go to the driver license division and test, or to a third-party tester to take their test. But we have had some trouble with students who are taking the written test 4, 5, 7, 12 times and not passing it at the school. Some of that is because the kid needs to actually study for the test. They think that just because they've sat in the car with their parents for the last 16 years, that they know what they're doing. And unfortunately, that's not true. So have them study for the test after the first time if they fail it. The second time they can retake it with you. But for subsequent times, it's best to send them to the driver license division, because they can do things to help that student. They have a progressive list of accommodations they can do. For example, they can have the test read to them in English, but they do have to take the test in English. They can't take the test in another language under current law. They can have as much time to take the test with you as they need. It is not a timed test. So the driver license division doesn't necessarily accommodate for additional time, because that's not prescribed in the testing practices. You can accommodate for extra time and give the student more time. But please only allow students to take either the written or the road test with you up to twice. And then the driver license division can help them after that. If you have questions about what accommodations the driver license division can give, go ahead and contact the driver license division coordinator, Audra. Who is that? Is that Sharon or Colton?
No, those are the DEMS people. Just go ahead and contact me and I can tell you what accommodations that they provide.
Okay, perfect. So Audra can help you with that as well. Okay, so our examiners course, Audra alluded to, we're going to have a brand new examiners course, which will be fantastic. It will walk you through the process of how to use DEMS. We're currently in the process of editing that and putting it together to get it out to you. It'll be sent out to you through a link with an email that Audra sends. It is separate and different from the last driver license division examiners training that you probably took. I took one way back in the day when it was on paper and pencil and you had to read a book and then you took this written test. There was one in between that we all were supposed to do. That one has now been rewritten and is being replaced. It's going to be hosted by OnQ Safety. It's going to keep track. You have to do it every 5 years by current policy passed by Utah State Board of Education. Some school districts may require it more often, and you are 100% allowed to take it more often if you want to get refreshed. Rich asks, we are not required to test our students. We can just send them to the DLD, right? Right. You're not absolutely required by law to test your students behind the wheel or for their, well, I take that back, for the permit. If you are asked, you are supposed to provide the permit test for them. For road testing, you're allowed to send them to the driver license division. Sometimes there's quite a wait though for them to test at the driver license division. So we try really hard, at least at my school and my district, to test the kids at our schools. Whoop, sorry about that. Okay, so it's going to be required every 5 years as of current policy, but you can do it more often. And we'll keep that training updated as DEMS changes and it looks different. We'll update the training so that you have accurate screenshots and know what it's supposed to look like, things like that. All right, training for the test. We have some best practices that will help us be the best trainers to help our students to take the test and do the very best that they can. Remember that as soon as we're testing them, we're not supposed to help them anymore. So one of the things that you can do is before you get in the car, before they start their test, go through some procedures with them, things that you want to make sure that they know. You know, for example, one thing I might say is, okay, I'm going to ask you to turn left at intersections or to turn right. Understand you are responsible for knowing when it is safe to do so. I'm just going to tell you, okay, let's turn left at the next intersection, and you need to know when it's safe to turn. If the weather is bad, you want to go over some things before you start testing them. As part of your training behind the wheel, you should talk to students about what to do if there's bad weather, even if the weather's not bad that day that you're training them. Those kinds of things we should practice for before it comes time to test, because once we test, we're taking off that teacher cap and putting on the examiner cap. So I encourage you to train on every drill every single time you go out and drive the student. I know that can feel excessive for some of you. I know that's not how some of the programs are set up, but if you will train on every drill every time, that student will be ready when it comes time for them to go out with an instructor. However, you want to increase the complexity of traffic over time. So on the very first drive with a kid, you might be training them on those drills in a parking lot or on your empty range or somewhere else where it's very safe. We were listening to a presenter earlier talk about how even residential roads can be complex and there's a lot of variables that go into those. We want to increase our complexity over time. You don't want to ask a kid to make a U-turn for the first time in the middle of State Street. You want to ask them to do those things in places where it's less complex and they have more flexibility for mistakes. You want to thoughtfully plan your route. You got to have a route that allows you to practice every drill, know where you can practice it, and maybe chuck a cone in the back of your car or some kind of trash can, because you might have a really well thought out route and then suddenly the car that you've been parallel parking behind every day for the last 6 months has been towed and you don't have a place to parallel park. And rather than spending half an hour trying to find a place to parallel park and to practice that, pull those cones out, pull that trash can out from the curb and practice parking behind that object, treating it like it's the back bumper of the car they're going to park behind. We do have to plan on time. So a route helps you plan and manage your time. And sometimes you do have to drive quite a ways to get to a hill or something like that. So you are allowed to simulate parking uphill and downhill. If your town doesn't have a hill close by, or if it's going to require an additional so much minutes of driving that you don't have time to get to it, then you're allowed to simulate it, even in their training as well as on their testing. And give feedback to the student after every single drive. I have a feedback form that I've shared with Audra, and she'll share it with you guys. It's just an optional form that I've created. It's not anything you have to use. Feel free to edit it. It's going to give you the option to copy it. It's a Google Drive document. So you'll have the ability to create a copy and you can edit it, change it, add to it, check it out, I don't care. But we really should give students feedback every time they drive and say, okay, you're ready to do your test on this one, but this one you're not ready to test on, and this is what you need to practice. And that will help the student to know how to improve for their next drive. And then communicate with their parents every single time their kid drives. Let them know what they did well, let them know what they need to improve. Now, a lot of us drive in the morning before school starts, and we drop our students off back at school, and we don't see the parent again. So email is great. If you give your student a feedback sheet, you can give feedback to the parents on that sheet and ask that the student turn it in. And then when the parent drops the student off to drive with you again, you can talk to them verbally. Those are some things that will set us up to have our students do the very best when they're taking their test. Now I'm going to switch to the DEMS training now. So I want to ask you guys at this point if you have any questions for me. And I'm going to stop my screen share. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask them in the chat or the Q&A. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have a lot of questions today, which is kind of interesting since there's 160 of you out there, but maybe I've gotten better at answering them early. Okay, if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or the Q&A, and Audra or I will catch it. We'll go from there. All right, I'm going to go back to the DEMS training. Okay. The new examiners course will also have training on DEMS attached, and it'll talk to you about the ethics of training and requirements among testing and things like that. And then once you're ready to put someone into the DEMS system, there's been a couple of things that have caused us some glitches to have double records for some students or to have incomplete records for some students. Some of you are frustrated because you can never find your students in the DEMS system. And so I'm going to walk through how to solve those problems. If a student has a permit, they are findable in DEMS, 100%. Brent Hawkins asks, where can we find the law and policy on the road skills testing guidelines for instructors? Brent, can you give me a little more specific information on that? There's about 10 different laws and codes, 10 different codes and rules that apply to guidelines for instructors. So if you'll give us a little bit more on that, I can be more specific on answering that. Okay, if a student does not have a permit, you're going to have a hard time finding them in DEMS, but if they have a permit, you can find them. Unless you are entering a written test, you should not create a new record for a student. But if you are entering a written test, creating the permit test for the student, then you will have to create a new record for the student. And then I was going to link to DEMS, but you've probably all seen it, so we're going to just skip ahead. I've got screenshots here. You're going to start out by logging in. Oh, Brent, you're asking for all of them. Okay, Audra's going to, she's typing an answer to you. She'll answer your question. Most of them are found in 53G, code section 53G for schools, or 53 for driver education, or R277 for the driver license division. I'm sure Audra will help you find those. Okay, this is our login screen. Once you're logged in, you're going to be asked to choose your company if you work for more than one school. If you only work for one school, you can just wait for a second. The company screen will eventually move on and let you get into the home screen. You want to make sure, if possible, that you are always entering information for the correct company. That means the school you work for. So, for example, I could work for Lone Peak High School at Alpine School District, or I could be entering information for East Shore Online students. And I want to make sure, if possible, that I'm entering those into the correct thing. It makes it easier for students to be found, students to be linked, those kinds of things. Linking is kind of a glitchy little thing that we don't realize is happening, but it takes the student from one school to another school. So if I have a student in a classroom at East Shore Online, and I put the classroom portion in, and then a student or a driver education instructor at, say, Pleasant Grove High is going to drive the student, when the instructor goes to enter the information, they'll have to link the student from East Shore to Pleasant Grove. Otherwise, you can't enter data. So, all right, we're going to click the next button. It'll take you to search for a student. You start on the home screen. Once you get past the company screen, this is the screen you'll look for. And you want to start out by, sorry, I guess I didn't draw a circle around it, by entering the driver license number. We were originally told that we needed to enter the last name, first name, and date of birth of a student. That has since changed because there's been some serious issues with spelling and with putting in the birth date correctly, and that makes it impossible to find the student if something is put in incorrectly. So we're going to search by the driver license number, which is their permit number. It's the big number across the top of their permit. Once you put that in, hit the word submit. And then you're going to get something that looks like this. Success, a student has been found. I blacked out the student's name, but I've got a blue line that tells me the student is there. And then I noticed that the student is already linked to my school. So that's a good thing. If I click on the student's name, I'll be able to enter information for them. But if the student is not found, I'll get a screen that looks like this with no results found. And at that point, I want to click on add a new student. Okay. When I do that, you're going to be able to put in the license number and you're going to find them by driver license number. Those two things are important. When you can find the student number, it will tell you a student has been found by giving you this pop-up here. You'll click on OK to update the record. And then it's going to bring this up and it will have automatically populated for you the names, the birth date, the license number will carry over that you put in, and then it will give you the active date, and it's usually the date that you created the record. If you notice that the name doesn't match the name you're expecting it to be, double check the permit number and make sure that you have that right. You should always make sure you're only entering information in for the correct student. If you have the permit number correct, but the student's name is incorrect, you may want to have them come back in and see if you can figure out what has happened. Okay, then hit the save button. And now you're going to check to make sure that you have a student who has been linked. So if I had a student, I typed in their permit number, I hit search, it brought me to here. And now I've got two students with the same name. One of them is linked and one of them is not linked. These are two different records created for the same student. My guess is Andrew took his class at East Shore Online, and then he did his road training and behind the wheel testing at Lone Peak High School. And the reason why they're not linked is because the teacher searched by their name, couldn't find it, so they created a new record. And now the classroom and the behind the wheel training are not connected to each other. When Andrew goes down to the driver license division, they're going to tell him, I'm sorry, you don't have everything you need to have done, completed. And then Andrew is going to email or call you and want to know why his information is not in the computer correctly. Always check to make sure that your student is actually in there using their driver license number. And if you find something like this, where you have a student that's linked and not linked, if you put the information in this record for the white line, go back into the other file by clicking on Andrew's name. You'll click on a button that says link and it will link it to you, and then you re-enter your information where the other teacher had put in theirs. You are not allowed to enter the other teacher's information into your record. So if needs be, you may have to try and find out who the other teacher was and contact them and ask them to put their information in your record if for some reason you can't get it in theirs. Okay, so where's the link button? That's probably a good question. The link button will be on this screen where we search for the student's name and permit. And right here, a new button has popped up right next to find driver license number. anytime you see that link button pop up, just click on it. That will link the kid to your school. Somebody else can link them to another school. It's not a one and done thing. If they take the classroom at East Shore, they train with a teacher at Pleasant Grove, and they come and test with me, I can link that to all those different schools, and they can go back and forth. But you just need to make sure it's linked so that you can enter information. Until that link button is pushed, the exams and training completion tabs are not available to you. Once you've clicked on link, then it will take you back to this screen. You can click on the student's name and you will have the ability to put in their exams and training completion. All right, so this is what behind the wheel and observation and classroom training looks like when you enter it. You click on training completion and then click on the button that says add. The add button then takes you to this screen where you put in what type of training you're entering. It's a drop-down box, classroom, observation, or behind the wheel. Enter your name and the completion date. When you do that, you're going to hit save, and then that information will be saved for the student. You can enter these things in more than once. So occasionally when I've clicked on the drop-down, I've accidentally clicked on the wrong thing, and I've put in observation twice. You can do that. It will let you put in multiples, but it won't let you delete them if it's a mistake. So like I put in observation, cool, I enter the information, and then I go to click on behind the wheel training, and for some reason I clicked on the wrong thing. It lets me put in observation again, and so I've got to make sure I actually have it finished and I've put in all the pieces. The only thing you can't put in twice is testing. So I can put in the classroom twice, I can put in observation or behind the wheel training twice if I make a mistake. I really, really try not to. You want to make sure that everything you're supposed to have put in there is put in there. This is not, you don't put a grade or a score in on this screen. By entering the information on the screen, you're certifying that it is completed. So if something is not completed, you really don't want to make that mistake. You only want to make that mistake if you know that it's done. And then once you hit save, it'll take you back here and it'll show you what has been entered. It shows you by whom. The driver license division can see whose login it was put in under and what date and time it was entered, things like that, to answer or clear up any questions. You always want to check that they have behind the wheel, observation, and classroom in, and that way they're finished. If you're the tester, when you go in to enter their test score, I would encourage you to look at this screen and make sure everything else has already been entered. If it hasn't, have the student contact the teacher who should have entered that information for them. And then we're going to go on to entering our road test. From training, you're going to click on the exams tab, which is right here. And that's where you can enter their written and their road testing. You click on the add button, then it will click on, or it will open this where you can drop down regular operator road or regular operator written. Make sure you get the right one. Put in your instructor name and the score of the student. So that's on a range from 0 to whatever, right? So if they've passed, it's got to be 20 or under. If they haven't passed, it's going to be 21 or over. You should not enter a failed test at this point. Okay, we got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to step over there. Can the main driver ed teacher enter everything for a student? Jana, no. We want to make sure that the student is having their information entered by the teacher who actually completed the information, completed the task with the student. If you're team teaching a driver ed class, then maybe one of the teachers does all of the DEMS entering for a classroom. But whoever did their behind the wheel training and whoever did their road testing with them should independently put those things into DEMS. And then Todd asked for a question, how long does it take for an instructor to get put into DEMS? One of my instructors has done everything but still doesn't show in DEMS. Well, they have to contact Audra when they've gotten their license, and until you get your license, Audra can't put you in DEMS. As soon as you've gotten confirmation that you're licensed, email Audra, and she's the only one who can add you or take you out of DEMS. Okay, so You only put in a passing test score. So that number should be between 0 and 20. If they have failed the test right now, do not enter that into DEMS. It's a possibility in the future that DEMS will allow us to enter failed tests so that the state can track how many students fail a test. There's another way to find that information, but it's less direct and it's a little bit harder to gather. So it's possible that that will change in the future. And then enter today's date or the day of the test date. You're going to notice there's other things down here that are not red asterisked. The asterisk means we have to enter it. The things that don't have a star next to them are things that are optional for us as public school road instructors. This program is also used for commercial driving instructors, and they have to enter that information. The DEMS people have to enter that information in. So that's there. And then you're going to hit the save button. Once you've saved it, you're going to get the ability to come over. Let's see, what am I trying to show you here? Oh, I want you to click back on student. So once you click on student, it'll take you back to the student you were searching for. And you'll notice right down here is a button that says completion certificate. If you click on that, it will generate a PDF and download it to your computer that looks like this. I find this helpful to make sure everything is entered: classroom training completion, observation training completion, behind the wheel training completion, and it gives their certificate of driving skills testing. Now, understand the certificate of driving skills testing is only valid for 12 months. So from the date that the student takes that test, they have 1 year to go and get their license. If they don't do it within that 12-month period, they have to go to the driver license division and retest. We cannot retest a student whose test has expired. They have to go to driver license division and test at that point. So I tell the parents, hey, your kid's got 1 year from today to go get their license. Most of them are very close to the age of 16, but sometimes a parent will require them to like complete a scout something before they can get their license. And I just want parents to know, if you make them wait until they accomplish some task, if they wait longer than 12 months to the day from today, they're going to have to take a test and pay for it again. And so usually that gets the parent and the student motivated to get the thing done. If you give your student this, it can be in print or it can be an electronic copy. It can be emailed, it can be texted, it can be handed to the student. But the driver license division does not accept this to show that they have completed the work. It's too easy for students to Photoshop these things. So it has to be entered in DEMS. One of the things this could help with is if I have created the document or created the student and somehow spelled the name wrong or something like that, it might help the person at driver license division to find their record. I don't actually send this with my students anymore because it's all in DEMS. I make sure that it's there and I tell the student with confidence that it's there. But if I generate a written test for the student and I'm creating a new record, then I do send a certificate with them, and I'll show you how to do that. You're only going to create a new record if all three of these things are met. First, the student does not have a current permit. Second, you did administer a written permit test to them and they passed that permit test. If the student has a permit, don't create a new record for them. If the student didn't take a written test from you, don't create a record for them. If they didn't pass that permit test, don't create a record. Okay, so we go to query. We're going to start out by putting in their name, birth date, and their first name over here, but don't put in their license number because they don't have one. And then hit the submit button. It's going to tell you that no student was found. And then you're going to hit the add a new student button. It's going to take you to here and it's going to bring over everything that you entered. I just reused a screenshot, so it has a license number here, but that will be blank. What it will have is a student number right here. And that student number is not your school's student number. It's a number that DEMS generates. Todd asked, Audra, I talked with, oh, I'm going to let him address that to Audra. Okay. Once this is all filled out by the computer, you can find the driver's license number, and it's going to tell you again that there's no student found. So, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So once you click find by driver license number, it's going to say no student found and ask you to create a student, which is where we are. Once you've added in the student's name and birth date, you're going to hit save. Once you click on save, you're going to be able to generate a test, and you're going to be able to give it to the student. Then you're going to come back to exams, choose written test, put in your name, and put in the score. Now that score is out of 100. It needs to be 80 or above to be passing, and if it's a failing score, don't put it in DEMS. And then you can leave the other boxes blank. Now, when they're all finished, go back to the student tab. Once you've hit save, go back to the student tab. And right here, you have the ability to generate a knowledge test document, and that will help them have a certificate. I don't have an example to show with you, unfortunately. I haven't given a permit test for a while, but it looks very similar to the completion certificate. And that one you need to sign, well, print, sign, and give it to the student to take to the driver license division, because that's how they will find the student. It has a number on it that's generated to link that record to that kid. If you don't give that document to them when they go to the driver license division, it's possible that I have spelled the name wrong, or that I have somehow entered something incorrectly, so the driver license division cannot find the student. That is exceptionally true when you are talking about a student from another culture. Some cultures have 2 or even 3 last names, but what is the legal last name? The only way to know that is by checking the birth certificate. The student might choose to go by one of those last names, but what does the birth certificate read as the last name? That's their legal last name, and we need to make sure the driver license division record matches that. One way to make sure there's not an issue there is to have the student bring in their birth certificate to you when they take their permit test, or a picture of it, so you can know what exactly does it say on their legal documents. What is their name? What is their first name? What is their last name? How is it spelled? You may have a student who has 2 or 3 middle names, or a hyphenated last name. You want to make sure you get it absolutely right, because this is a legal document you're entering here. Okay, if you have any questions about DEMS, I haven't added Colton on there, but I will type his name and email address into the chat feature while I leave that one up for you. Coulter, Coulterbealdes. These people can answer questions for you if you have them. Oh, Audra's already on it. Look at her. But these people can answer questions for you at the driver license division. Do not just call the general public phone number for the DLD, because you're going to get some random person who doesn't know anything about student records or DEMS or anything. You're going to need to talk to these 2 people specifically. That's their job, is to interface with us as public school teachers and the driver license division. Feel free to email me if you have any questions. My email is aterry@alpinedistrict.org. And I'm happy to answer or to share any documents I have. Anything I talked about, I will be sharing with Audra if I haven't already. And she's going to put that out there for you guys to be able to get. I'm not quite sure how that's going out, but my guess is in an email with a bunch of attachments. So if you have any questions about DEMS or about anything I talked about, I'm happy to answer. If you want to put your questions in the chat box. I did go through that kind of quickly. I didn't realize how fast I was getting through that, Audra, because usually this one takes longer. But I'm going to hang out and see if you have any questions for the next 10 minutes or so. And then I guess there's a break between me and the next person.
Let's make sure that we clear up who puts something in DEMS. If you learned anything from watching Rich Hansen's session, you should never put in someone else's scores, because then now you're liable for that student. If you don't have the ability to be putting scores in DEMS, you probably don't have an endorsement, and you shouldn't be. I mean, if you're not in DEMS, there's a reason why, and you need to reach out to me. So if you have an endorsement, you should be in DEMS.
Yeah, if you don't have your own access to DEMS, contact Audra. Maybe you fell through the cracks, or we've had a couple people who were on SAEPs, state approved endorsement plans, that forgot they were on an SAEP and didn't really finish the endorsement. And we've caught that because they've said, well, I need to be on DEMS. How do I do that? And we've caught, oh, we need to have you finish this coursework so that you can actually get your endorsement. We can finish an endorsement now in 2 semesters if a student is really dedicated. You for sure can finish in a year really easy, and you have up to 2 years to complete your endorsement, but we don't want to drag it out any longer than necessary for sure. Wendy Parker has a question. Oh, I want to go back. Sorry, one more thing. If something catastrophic happens and you have not entered something into DEMS yet, for example, we had a teacher not too long ago die unexpectedly. He had completed observation with the students, behind the wheel training with the students. He had it on paper. There's a way to fix that. The student doesn't have to start over because the teacher has died. But you want to make sure that as a rule, you are not entering in stuff into DEMS for someone else. Wendy Parker asked, if you save it, do you have to link it also? The only time you should have to link is if some record was already created by someone else, and you won't be able to enter training or exam data into DEMS if it has not been linked to you. So if you're having trouble figuring out, well, I can't get this information I don't have the training tab. I have the student tab, but I don't have the training or the exam tab across my top of my screen. Chances are good you need to go back to the student tab and click on link. And if you do that, you should be able to then enter training and exam data and save it. And Rich asked, are we allowed to use cones for parallel park on the road test? Is Tara on, Audra?
I just asked Coulter and she's not. Is Sharon or Coulter, is Sharon Harward on, Colton?
She is not currently.
What about Coulter Bald?
He is not on as well.
Okay. Usually the DLD has been watching our sessions on this so that they don't, so they can tell us that we said something wrong.
Yeah, in the last 2 sessions, I have said that you could simulate parallel parking, and they never corrected me on it.
Yeah, I believe that Tara said that that was completely okay to do parallel parking with cones.
Sometimes you just can't find anybody within a reasonable period of driving. Like, it makes sense. I have a cone thrown in the back of my car. We just drive around with it. It's our friend.
So I'm going to say go ahead, and that's fine to do it that way. And if there's some reason the DLD, I will check with them, but I believe she said that was fine.
Okay, we've had some great questions.
Wendy Parker asks, if you save it, did you answer that question? Do you have to link it also? You should do both.
Yeah. Well, Audrey, you can't add in exam information or training information without it being linked. So if you don't see the link button on the student page, you don't need to worry about it. If the link button's there, click it.
There's a question about more seniors in driver's ed. The statute says that seniors can be in driver's ed up until October 1st of their graduation year. So you can teach them through October 1st per statute.
Yeah. So they have to be absolutely completed by October 1st. They can't start taking the class or start training on that day.
They're not covered from your insurance. That's the big thing.
Right. It's whether or not they're considered a student at that school any longer. And they drop off being a student at that school on October 1. Okay, any other questions for me?
If you have questions that you think of later about testing, the examiner's training course will be done in about 2 weeks, and I will send it out to everyone, and everybody should take it. It's going to have more detail on the test, how to perform the maneuvers of the test. For examples, we had people talking about how they were doing backing. It's not backing to a parking spot. It's actually parking on the side of the road and checking, backing on the side of the road. So we'll have all of that will be in the new course. It's really nice, and it will have DEMS walk you clear through all of DEMS and how to click here, click there, and anything that might come up. So looking forward to having that done. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to ask Allison or myself. We can both help you.
I'm going to put links in the chat to all of the documents I talked about. Audra will be able to send these to you as well. There's a link to my PowerPoint as well at the very bottom. There's a DEMS lucid chart training that walks you through, this is the screen, this is what you're going to do next, and so on. If you have trouble opening the lucid chart, let me know. I don't know if others have to have an account to view it or if I just had to have an account to create it. I've given an example of the driving feedback form that I created. There's a parent guide for how to help your parents to train their students, because parents don't know, they have no clue what to do. That's an example from the Drive Right curriculum. There's an observation of parents sheet. So we at our school ask our students to go and watch their parents drive with very specific things in mind. It's not just, hey, go drive to the church. It's, hey, let's go drive to the church and I'm going to show you how I make right and left turns, or how I do a U-turn, or things like that. The parent guide also includes an example of how parents could do training on specific things with their student. And then when I very, very first got endorsed, I had to take the examiner's course on paper. And one of the things that was in that paper handout that we're not getting anymore is a skills test scoring. I want to call it a handbook. And it tells you exactly step by step what you are supposed to do with the student for every single drill. So for example, backing is not backing out of a parking space. Backing involves turning on their right turn signal, checking over their right shoulder, pulling off to the right side of the road and stopping, not coasting, turning off their signal. It's that kind of stepped out. And I think those of you who started after they got rid of the paper handbook have never seen it. So I included a copy of it there. But Audra will send that stuff out to you, I'm sure, in an email. So if you can't grab it from the chat, you can get it that way. Andrew Burton, I've always had to add my students to DEMS manually. Did I understand right? Does the DLD enter students in DEMS when they get their permits? They do. They don't enter it into DEMS though. There's two different programs. Driver License Division uses one database, and then DEMS, we enter in the student's permit number and it goes to the Driver License Division's database, looks for it, fetches it, and brings it back into DEMS. Tara explained that as it's a way to protect student privacy and student data by not having it in another place that could possibly be hacked. So you don't want to enter your students manually. If they have a permit number, search by their driver license number or their permit number, and then hit find by DL. And that will help you, help DEMS go to the Driver License Division's database, grab the information and pull it back. I hope that answered your question, Andrew. Okay, I think I caught everything from the chat box, and my time is officially up in 2 minutes. So I'm going to head out and let you guys have your 10-minute break before your next presenter.